I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Ronny Jackson criticized the Biden administration during a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on Thursday. Jackson claimed allies have lost confidence in the United States because of the administration's foreign policy, like the handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Blinken countered, telling the Texas Republican that the United States' relationship with its allies is at a, quote, high point. Let's listen in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McCall, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Mr. Secretary, it's hard to see any signs of success from the Biden administration over the past 15 months. Our constituents are facing higher prices and lower supplies across all industries, particularly at the gas pump. The world is markedly less safe, and many of our allies are in immediate danger. And the administration seems more worried about catering to the socialist left than about virtue signaling than about actually getting things done to help everyday Americans. Since this administration took office, our three main global adversaries have become emboldened and strengthened. In Europe, President Biden failed to deter Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine despite ample evidence for months of military buildup, and now we all watch with horror at war crimes and the violence that's unfolding. In the Indo-Pacific, as I saw firsthand on a CODEL I recently was on last week, to Australia, Japan, and Taiwan, China continues its attempts to disrupt the world order through threatening its neighbors like Taiwan, through vaccine diplomacy for a virus it both created and covered up, and through its malicious Belt and Road Initiative. And in the Middle East, according to reports from negotiations in Vienna, Iran stands poised to receive enormous gains without giving up its nuclear deployment. Each concession by this administration means more of our service members abroad and more of our allies, particularly Israel, are at imminent risk. Mr. Secretary, I think many of us in this room are concerned about the evolving crisis faced by Taiwan, and that's been mentioned, and the economic and security risk of nations around the world if China decides to invade Taiwan. We have witnessed two enormous foreign policy failures, in my opinion, between this administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan and its early concessions to Russia as Putin prepared for and then invaded Ukraine. It is clear from these actions and from what I've learned during my meetings on this recent CODEL that we must reestablish confidence in our allies. Mr. Secretary, what steps are you taking to ensure allies like Taiwan are confident in America's support, particularly after our mistakes in Afghanistan and Ukraine?
Thank you. Look, I don't want to put words in allies and partners' mouths. That wouldn't be appropriate, but I think it's fair to say from what I'm hearing around the world, and I would certainly invite the Chairman and the Ranking Member as well who've been making the rounds, I would suggest to you that the confidence of our allies and partners in the United States right now is at a high point, precisely because of the leadership that we have exerted through these many months with regard to Ukraine, but also on many other issues. Indeed, Congressman, one of the first instructions I had on taking office from President Biden was to focus on re-energizing and revitalizing these alliances and partnerships. And that's exactly what we did. We are now in better standing at NATO than we've been in as long as I can remember. We have revitalized partnerships throughout the Asia-Pacific, where you were, including with Japan, with Korea, with Australia, with New Zealand. We have energized the Quad that brings together the United States, India, Australia, and Japan. As you know, this is a vital institution. We have re-engaged with ASEAN across the board, and I could go down the list. I think our standing with allies and partners is stronger than it's ever been, and there's a good reason for it, and you're right to focus on it. It's because most of the challenges we face are most effectively dealt with when we're working together with allies and partners, and that's exactly what you're seeing in Ukraine right now. Because of all the countries that we have brought together, the Ukrainians have what they need to repel this Russian aggression. We've got to keep working on that. Secretary of Defense was just in Germany with 40 other defense ministers from around the world to make sure that we can continue to get the Ukrainians exactly what they need to continue to do the job. And on Taiwan, we are resolute in making sure that Taiwan has what it needs to defend itself, as we have been for decades across 8 administrations. And we will work with you and work with other members of the committee to make sure that we're doing that as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have another question here. Sir, outrageous gas prices are hurting my constituents, yet the administration continues to attack American oil and gas.
Put your microphone on, Mr. Jackson.
Can you hear me? Better? On. How about that? No? Okay. Sir, outrageous gas prices are hurting my constituents, yet administration continues to attack American oil and gas. Biden's price hike blame game is not only falling on deaf ears, but it's also not believable. Gas prices have risen each week since Biden took office due to this disastrous and ill-advised posture towards American energy companies. Beyond the failed domestic energy policies, it also seems that your department's policy towards our Gulf partners is failing. I was disappointed to see that National Security Advisor Sullivan approached the meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince in a way that offended the kingdom. This, in my opinion, is not the way to handle such relationships during a global energy crisis. My constituents ask me each day what the government is doing to lower their gas prices. So I'd like to turn that question to you, Mr. Secretary. What is your strategy to work with other countries, particularly our Gulf partners, to increase access to energy and decrease the world's reliance on Russia oil and gas?
It is very important.
Secretary, to do that in writing. I've got to be strict on the 5-minute rule because we got so many folks that want to make sure that we
Congressman,
get.
I'll follow up in writing with you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it.